Hello cruel world, my name is Dr. 𝐏𝐬𝐲𝐝 𝐷𝐴S. I'm an NHS doctor and a consultant forensic psychiatrist. I assess mentally disordered offenders for a living so that you don't have to. You can call me the ominous 𝐏𝐬𝐲𝐝. Now, in this episode, I'm going to explain what narcissistic abuse is. I'm not just going to talk about vague concepts like some other chumpy YouTubers. I'm going to give you some actual real life hypothetical examples. And the purpose of me making these videos is for you to start thinking like a forensic psychiatrist, also to take over the world, but we'll get to that. I'm also going to tell you the consequences and signs of suffering this type of abuse so that you can tell whether you're suffering from it or not. So sit back, relax, grab your mirror, and welcome to A Psych for Sore Minds. So as you probably know, narcissism is like this grandiose sense of self-importance. So basically people having a massive ego, really feeling themselves. But that's just like a general adjective. Narcissistic personality disorder is a psychiatric disorder. So it's a disease. And with that, you get everything that I talked about, but these people are a bit kind of extreme. They're the extreme version of that. So they have a preoccupation with fantasies of unlimited success, with power, with brilliance, with beauty. So they actually believe that they're something special and unique. And because of that, they kind of require this excessive admiration. So I guess what I'm talking about is a sense of entitlement. Also, crucially for this, when we're talking about abuse, they're also quite exploitative. So they take advantage of other people to achieve their own ends. And that's kind of collected to psychopaths or psychopathy. So there's a big overlap between psychopaths and narcissists. If you're interested in the similarities and the difference, you should go and check out my video about exactly that. Narcissists versus psychopaths. I'll put the links in the comments section below. Always be plugging. So people who are extreme narcissists, they lack empathy and they are unwilling to or unable to recognize feelings and needs in other people, which is why they can quite easily do all of this different levels of abuse. They often believe that other people are envious of them and that they are extra special. So to summarize, narcissistic abuse, which I'm about to talk about, is all of those things, but it's abuse coming from a perpetrator that displays all of those characteristics. Now, before we jump into it, I would say that from my previous episodes, some people in my comment section have accused me of being a narcissist. And I just want to make this crystal clear. I'm not a narcissist. I just happen to be amazing at everything and I'm really important. And I know for a fact that I'm special. How do I know? Because my mummy told me in primary school. Okay, so when I'm talking about narcissistic abuse in this episode, I'm mostly talking about the context of a romantic relationship, but it's not unique to this scenario. You can have narcissistic abuse from like a parent, a sibling, a mother-in-law, a co-worker, or even a friend. And obviously it can happen from males to females, males to males, etc. In this episode, I'm going to focus on male to female narcissistic abuse, simply because it's the most common form. Okay, so let's start off with thinking about the behaviours and the forms of narcissistic abuse. Number one has got to be gaslighting. Now, you might have heard this term before. So what is gaslighting? Gaslighting is a form of psychological manipulation which makes you question your own beliefs and thereby questioning your own lived experience. So I said I'm going to give you some specific examples. Let's talk about a hypothetical couple who I will refer to for the rest of this video. I don't know, let's call them Fred and Rose. So one evening, Fred is late to dinner with Rose. They're only going to Harvester. They're not particularly a classy couple. But instead of accepting that he's late, he convinces Rose that they had a conversation on the phone earlier, which didn't happen, where he said that he would be late. So it was actually her fault. And Rose doubts herself, and then she just kind of by default believes Fred, and she ends up apologizing, even though it wasn't her fault. By the way, I've done a whole separate video expanding more on gaslighting, which I'll leave in the description. Always be plugging. So that's gaslighting. What else? What are the other forms of narcissistic abuse? There's also isolating and marginalizing the victim. So what does that mean? It means that the abuser isolates their partner from their own family and their friends. And this is because they might be quite jealous and they don't want their partner to be influenced by other people. So especially if their friends and family encourage the victim to leave the perpetrator. So obviously that's not in the perpetrator's best interest. So isolation basically occurs when the narcissist tries to convince you that your family and your friends are no good for you. And they might even lie to try and convince you that your family and friends are acting against your best interest. So how do they do this? A very common example would be that they spread rumors and lies about the people that you love. And this can lead to tension between you and your friends and family. And then, once your friends and family are outside of the picture, the narcissist, the perpetrator, has more control over you. It's me and you against the world, baby, is something that they might say. So let me give you an example. So Rose used to do aqua aerobics every Tuesday night with her old school friends. And Fred really didn't like this, so he wanted her to gradually stop. So at first he had this pattern of offering to cook on a Tuesday night and would intentionally take so long in preparing his food that Rose just didn't make it to her sessions. And on one occasion, Rose's friend called up to ask where she'd been and why she hadn't been going to the lessons. And Fred lied and said that he would ask Rose, but he actually didn't pass on the message. Things get worse, I'm afraid. Fred bumped into Rose's friend Eileen at Iceland. As I said, they're not very classy. And she actually asked about how Rose was doing. But Fred, when he was recounting the story back to Rose, he lied. He insinuated that Eileen was dissing Rose's water aerobics, that her timing and her moves were off. And not only that, but Fred told Rose that Eileen was licking her lips in a sexualized manner during their encounter at Iceland, whereas that wasn't true. In actuality, she just had a cold sore. Okay, another form of narcissistic abuse is withholding or denying resources. Now, when I say resources, obviously money is probably the most obvious one. So, financial coercion is what I'm talking about. But it's not just money. It could be withholding conversation, sex, or even forms of affection. So basically what I'm talking about is when somebody is giving you the frozen shoulder. No, wait, that's not right. They're giving you tennis elbow. No, giving you the cold shoulder. That's what I meant, sorry. So what's the result of that? You may feel that you're constantly working to try and earn things, and the perpetrator might expect you to feel grateful for their sudden show of generosity, whereas actually it's just a normal gesture, which is standard for any relationship. And the effect of this is that over time, it can knock your confidence and decrease your self-esteem. So to go back to our hypothetical couple, Fred convinced Rose to quit her job to look after his 4-year-old son from a previous marriage. I've got to be honest, the son was a nightmare. He still does poopies in his nappies and he only eats crunchy nut cornflakes. But Fred also convinced Rose to sell her car so that they could use the money to go on a romantic cruise to Skegness. And at first he said that he would chauffeur her around and take her to all her appointments. And he did this initially, but over time this gradually reduced and then stopped. So when Rose needed a manicure, Fred made this big show about it, and eventually he takes her and he kind of forces her to show this extreme gratitude. But while she was at the appointment, Fred was waiting outside the shop in the car and he was watching her the entire time. Another aspect of narcissistic abuse is blame shifting. So people with narcissistic personality disorder, they often struggle themselves with their self-esteem. So this often leads for them to blame you for their actions and any kind of perceived wrongdoing they assign towards you. So back to Fred and Rose. Fred had an argument with Rose's sister because Rose's sister was worried about Rose's well-being. She hadn't been to her water aerobics. She hadn't gone to a lot of recent family gatherings. But because of the argument, Fred actually blamed Rose for having, his words, such a batshit crazy family. So now the victim starts to believe the perpetrator and accepts the blame over time. Now, the astute among you might think that that's very similar to gaslighting, and there is a big kind of crossover, but it's not the same, because gaslighting involves lying about something that you did and distorting your own reality, whereas blame shifting is not necessarily telling lies, but shifting the kind of narrative of whose fault it is. So just to really hammer home this point, another random example of blame shifting off the top of my head might be, I don't know, like a YouTuber trying to insinuate that because you didn't subscribe to a Psych for Sore Minds, that in turn caused the fuel crisis. That actually happens to be true, by the way. Okay, moving on, another form of narcissistic abuse is invading the victim's privacy and coercive control. So if you're in like a relationship with a narcissist, they might invade your privacy by, checking your emails or your text messages. They might even go as far as tracking you using location apps. And then the reason they do this is because they take charge and they make decisions about where you can or cannot go. Obviously, this is a clear invasion of privacy. So to give you an example, back to Fred and Rose, they both agreed to go to the gym for a visit. And Fred did a couple of bicep curls, but then he spent the rest of the session just sat outside Rose's yoga class. And the whole time he was like staring in and watching her intently. And then after the class, an instructor was speaking to Rose and a few other people, just talking about the types of yoga mats they should buy. But Fred was obsessed with this. He was insanely jealous, and he was giving this instructor the evil eye afterwards. And then afterwards, in the car journey home, Fred blamed Rose in the car for flirting with the instructor, which just simply wasn't true. And then he made the decision that she's not allowed to go to gym by herself, and he has to drive her in future gym visits. And if that wasn't bad enough, dear viewers, Fred even skipped leg day that day. By the way, if you're interested in this, you see my video on domestic violence. I actually done one on Curtis from Top Boy, and I've kind of psychoanalyzed how this kind of behavior, if you're a fan of Top Boy, then you'll know what I'm talking about. If you're not, what's wrong with you? You need to go and check that out immediately on Netflix. Amazing. Okay, so these are the forms of narcissistic abuse. Now let's move on to the meat and two veg of this video, which is about the effects and the consequences and the telltale signs that you, my Psych for Sore guys and gals, might be involved in a narcissistic abusive relationship. But before I do that, first let me introduce you to this channel, A Schmike for Small Minds. It is a smorgasbord of videos and topics related to mental illness and offending and the crossover between the two. Sometimes I do trending topics and celebrity things like Amber Heard, Jimmy Savile, R. Kelly. Sometimes it's more about individual separate topics like this. I am your favourite Asian London-based YouTubing forensic psychiatrist with a gold tooth, or at least in your top 3. And I implore you to subscribe to this channel. Not only does it help me out immensely, but it guarantees that you'll never get a flat tire ever again, guaranteed all your money back. Okay, back to the video. Effects, consequences, and telltale signs that you are in a narcissistic abusive relationships. First and foremost, there is a loss of confidence. So you do not want to talk to strangers or even your friends and family. In fact, you don't even want to leave the house. Another indication of this loss of confidence is you have difficulty with decision making. So you're always doubting and second guessing yourself, even outside of the context of the relationship. So for example, decisions at work. And this happens because the perpetrator has gradually chipped away at your own self-esteem and your confidence. Another sign, which is kind of in some ways related, is that always thinking problems are your fault. So it's kind of accepting this blame shifting. Again, I'm not just talking about decisions or behaviors within the relationship, but in general. So you blame yourself, for example, for your difficult friends and family who, as I said, are actually just looking out for you, but you've been kind of almost brainwashed to think like that. And again, kind of connected is apologizing often, even when it's not your fault, especially towards the perpetrator. So you find yourself walking on eggshells. And you spend most of your energy trying not to trigger anger or arguments from your partner. So to give you an extreme example, you need money to go out for groceries and your partner is withholding this money and you're very scared and preoccupied about how you're going to broach this subject and almost ask for permission. Finally, there are feelings of isolation and withdrawal. So you feel kind of disconnected and you feel alone, lonely, lonesome, other adjectives with lone in it, and you feel like you've lost a sense of identity because you're spending so much time by yourself or with your perpetrator that there's nothing left in terms of your social life. Okay, so those concludes my telltale signs. So to summarize this whole episode, what have we talked about, my Psych for Sore guys and gals? I try to explain what narcissistic abuse actually is. I've used Hypothetical examples from this couple, Fred and Rose. We've learned that my mummy thinks that I'm special, but most importantly, I've taught you, hopefully, about the consequences and the signs so that you can tell if you're in this type of relationships. That's enough from me. Buy my goddamn book. It is a narrative and a story of how I became a forensic psychiatrist and some of my most interesting anonymised criminal cases. It will shock you, it will bring you to tears, and it will make your life better somehow. Buy my goddamn book. Stay euthymic, but whatever happens, the most important thing, do not forget, I love you.